No, in the very first episode of the first season of Tokyo Vice, there's this great scene, probably my favorite out of the entire show, where you're studying for this insane Japanese exam. You have to pass to become a staff writer at the newspaper, I believe. And you're
Yeah.
clearly the only foreigner in the radius of about a dozen kilometers or something, much less in the exam room. And I believe you said that the way they depicted that scene in the show was actually quite authentic. So I definitely want to talk about that. But before we do, let's just explore the trajectory of your life
Okay.
a little bit. What made you want to be not a journalist in the States where you're from, and not, let's say, an American correspondent based in Japan reporting for Western media, but maxing out on the difficulty level and actually wanting to become a foreign local journalist writing for a Japanese newspaper in Japanese? I mean, just saying this out loud makes it seem kind of nuts, but also kind of awesome.
Well, I mean, this is really kind of disappointing for aspiring journalists to hear. But the truth is that, I didn't really have ambitions of becoming a journalist in college. It was more like this. In Japan, in your last year of college, it's really common to try and find a job, so that early, like your third year. It's shushoku katsudo. I mean, everybody does it. So I had a job lined up at Sony. What's called a naite. So it's basically this agreement that, we will hire you as soon as the official hiring season. And with a year left in school, and no real goal, I was like, wow, I really need to bone up on my written and spoken Japanese. And I was writing for the school newspaper in Japanese, which, was more of, which was fun. I think my editor, Inukai, who actually later went off to the Mainichi Shimbun, the student editor, had to suffer through my terrible, written Japanese, but he was very patient, and he would be like, this doesn't make sense. Like, you're not writing literature, you're writing a newspaper article. So on the job training in a sense. And my fellow members of the Sophia newspaper, the Jochi Shimbun, they were, studying for these exams. And what are these exams? Like, oh, we want to be in the media. We want to be newspaper reporters. And every single company has a different exam, and they have tests that you have to take. And, here are the parts of the test. Is like an essay test. Well, there's an essay, there's a language study, there's often translation, there's a section on current events, and you can prepare for them. So we're preparing for them. And I was like, okay, that's great. That's a great goal. I will prepare for these tests and see how I do. So I joined a class at the local culture center. Japan has like lots of culture centers where you can enroll in a little, like, like adult education kind of, where you can enroll in these classes. And sometimes they're for college students as well. So I could have done tea ceremonies. So I took like the mass communications examinations countermeasures class. That's my clumsy translation of it. And then I took a class at Kyoto newspaper on writing essays. So I'm studying for these things for a year, right? And this is like my hobby. I'm someone who likes to study. I like to have a goal. And, someone asked me, I think, like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm studying for these newspaper examinations. And I think was the mom of a friend of mine was like, you'll never hire a foreigner to do a Japanese person's job. You're crazy. No one will you'll never pass these things. And I was like,
And this is when, like the end of the 90s.
This is like 1992.
Okay.
1992.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm kind of thinking, well, screw you, like, who are you, lady? Like, nobody tells me what I can and can't do. I'm a very contrarian person. I didn't think the odds were in my favor. So, the day comes, I sign up for this seminar, and keep in mind, the seminars are officially not for hiring practices. They're just like to learn about the paper and test your knowledge. But everyone knows that they're the backdoor methods of being hired. So everybody's going to these things, everybody in their navy blue suits and their ties and their, shoes shined and looking nice. If you've had your hair dyed red, or which was very popular at the time, so you look like a juvenile delinquent, you dye it back black. Everybody knows to look the part, right? You're not going to show up at this interview in jeans and a t-shirt, though they might now. So I mean, I remember, and it's in the book too, is that I didn't really own a very good suit. I had some suits that I used for teaching English on the side, but I didn't own like a very fancy suit. So I went to some suit place and I bought like, what is called a reifuku, and, you know, but what I ended up buying was actually a suit for a funeral. So with the black tie and everything. So, people gave me a lot of shit about it, but I was like, you know what, screw it. Like, this is the only suit I got and I'm not going to get in this thing anyway. So I went to all my interviews in my reifuku. Looking very yakuza-esque, those are the only people that wear black ties outside of funerals. Though, of course, if you're a member of Japan's organized crime, it probably makes sense to go to work in a black tie because, there's a lot of funerals in that business. So, and I did very well I thought I did very well on the examination with Kyoto News, which is kind of like the Associated Press of Japan. They are still calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico, by the way.
Respect.
Doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, with the Yomiuri examination, which was held like at a technical school, because the Yomiuri Shimbun is an empire. I mean, it has its travel agency. It has Yomiuri Land, which is their amusement park. They have the Yomiuri Giants, which is the baseball team, and they had a technical school, which they held the seminar at. So I went to the seminar, and, it's just like in the thing was like, are you in the right place? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in the right place. This is me. The names match up. And the exam went well, but just like in the TV series, like I didn't realize there were questions on the back page. Usually, in the West, usually, you don't turn over the back page. It's like, you answer the tests and you're done. So I missed maybe two questions, like two big, I don't know how much of they were, but they were questions I totally didn't answer them. And I almost walked out. I almost gave up. And one of these guys from the personnel department, Endo-san, is this little tiny guy with glasses, kind of a Beatles haircut. He passed away years ago from, I think, throat cancer. Came up to me and he was like, hey, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm, taking this examination to see how much, to test my Japanese ability. I know that I'm never going to be hired, but I thought, why not try? And he was kind of like, and he looked at, so sort of flipped through the book. He's like, oh, you're doing pretty good. It's like, you should think seriously about working for us. We are trying to be more of an international presence. And I was kind of like, it's like, I've come this far. Like, why go home? And then the essay was gaikokujin, which is the word for foreigner. And I had written on this subject before because it's, of course, something that you're going to write about in a class, And so I wrote an essay. I rewrote actually an essay that I'd written before and had kind of the corrected version in my head of, how Japan's immigration policy was exploitive and they just kind of rotated between countries. They would give countries unconditional visas. They would let those workers in. Those workers would become a problem as they tried to settle in or didn't leave. And then Japan would kick them all out and then find another country to do the same thing with. And, I wrote that, Japan needed an actual immigration policy and just instead of revolving exploitation of foreign labor, something that is still true today, pretty much. They keep trying to reform the system, but they won't really settle on like, let's actually set up a system where people could live here and be integrated into society and live here permanently. Anyway, that was easy. And then, the test results came back. I think much later, well, actually, I mean, I went on, whatever reason, I went on to the interview process. And, by the time we got to the last interview, I realized, wow, these people might actually hire me. I mean, they seem quite serious about it. And there was this kind of question about, I hear the Jews control the world economy. And I did joke like, yeah, if we control the world economy, do you think I would be working for the salary you're offering? Which wasn't a bad salary. I mean, but compared to like Sony, it wasn't such a great salary.
Wait, why did they ask you that? To see if you believe any sort of conspiracy theories, or was it just like to throw you off? Or
I think it was to see, I think
How
it might have
direct?
been. I think it might have been. One is that it is a conspiracy theory that was believed in Japan, and maybe the guy was just testing it for his own amusement, or maybe they wanted to see how would I deal with sort of, you know, uh, you know, racism, or blatant racism, or subtle racism, or ignorant racism. Would I lose my cool? Would I keep my sense of humor? And I was just like, as they say in Japanese, kairu ni shonben, like pissing off a frog. It was just like, I was like, boop, that's, and that was probably the right answer. They also asked me, like, can you eat sushi? And I was like, I can't eat sushi. And they're like, and there was another question related to, like, you are a Jewish background. Can you work on the Sabbath? And of course, I've never been really very particular about those things. So, like, of course, not a problem. I'm not like, I'm not like an Orthodox Jew. I'm not gonna, I don't need the Sabbath off. I'll work, I work, whatever hours you ask me to work. Thinking back on it, maybe if I was sure that I was going to get hired, I could have claimed the Sabbath off, and then I could have actually had some vacation time.
And then you pass, and you actually
Mm,
become a journalist, or
yeah,
not yet?
I passed,
You passed, yeah.
I passed my score on the translation section was very helpful. I think I got like 20 out of 20 from translating English into Japanese. And what still irks me is I got 19 out of 20 in translating Japanese to English. And I'm like, how can you take a point off of my English? But maybe I mistranslated something. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the test results. Uh, and by the way, the Yomiuri Shimbun probably would still insert that like that those aren't real test results, because it's a seminar. It's not a hiring thing. But they offered me the job, and I took it. And I said, Sony, uh, um, sorry, thank you
Thanks,
very
but
much
no
for offering the
thanks.
job, but thank you, but no thanks. Which the irony is that I did this podcast for Sony. I've done 2 for them now. The Evaporated in 2022, 2023 about missing people in Japan, and Witnessed the Night Shift about a serial killer in my hometown at the hospital where my father worked. And so I, 30 some years later, I actually ended up working for Sony. So here we are, full circle. I'm not working for the Yomiuri, and here I'm working for Sony. Not that I regret my original decision, but there is a delicious irony in ending up where you started.
Hey, legends, thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I've been told I have to say that, otherwise nothing ever happens odd. Also, if you feel like it, do support me on Patreon. I'm playing the world's smallest violin here, but this is a one-person pod. I do everything myself. There's no team behind me, so please feel free to hop on Patreon and find smart cookies on there. And then last, but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons, Tovarishi and Tovarishice, you podcast champions. Without you, there would be no smart cookies, which makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal thanks to Sasha Vipotnik, Neven Cvjanovic, Juš Premrov, Nate Sirk, Goran Ivašić, Anže Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaž Maher, Štrole, Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordon, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Taichi. The community is growing, so I am really touched. Thank you.